Hello and welcome back to the Walk and Talk. I just want to say, top of this episode, I hope everyone's feeling okay today because I think we're officially in the most depressing week of the year or something like that. But do you know what? I don't feel too shabby this month. I feel like I'm riding out the snowstorm that is January quite well so far, if I do say so myself. I'm slowly planning out some fun projects for the year ahead. I'm a little bit low-key starting to look forward to Crufts, which lands at the beginning of March and is always my absolute favourite event of the year, made doubly special this year because I didn't actually get to attend last year. We had tickets, but then we had a family emergency and we had to bail out last minute. So you know what they say about absence making the heart grow fonder and all that jazz. I'm really extra excited about attending it this year. Touch wood, of course. I've probably jinxed that now, haven't I? Anyway, we are not here to talk about all the things that make me happy today. Hard tangent, back to topic now. And actually, this is going to be a bit of a tricky transition because this week I want to actually talk about a topic that's a bit more stressful and causes a lot of angst for so many dogs and dog owners alike. And that is the topic of separation anxiety, separation training, independence, hyperdependence, whichever angle you want to look at it from. This is an episode I've wanted to record for a really long time, actually, because I feel like it's one of those areas of dog training where there are so many random, like, tidbits of advice available online and stuff. But when it comes to the actual explanation and a deeper understanding of what's going on and awareness of what's actually happening for your dog and why it's happening and the science behind it, and what works and what doesn't work and why it works and why it doesn't work and what can make things worse and what will actually help you progress long term, and then what might interrupt your progress or undo like all the good stuff that you might have done so far. I don't think there's so much of that out there. Well, not of any real quality anyway. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have seen some people make some really bold claims about the origins or reasons behind separation anxiety. But yeah, we won't go there because I'm not about that. But the point I'm trying to make is when you don't fully understand what is actually happening for your dog emotionally and neurologically, it's really easy to end up following this advice and doing these things that feel totally logical, but they can actually quietly make the problem a whole lot worse. So today, I want to slow this right down. We are going to talk about separation anxiety and what that looks like and how we work with it, yes, but we're also going to talk about separation learning much more broadly. How dogs learn to cope with being alone, why some dogs struggle profoundly with it, and why others don't, and why so much well meaning advice around independence for dogs can more often than not completely miss the mark. So, if you're just after quick fixes, this episode probably isn't for you. But if you are genuinely ready to learn about the process of building dogs who feel safe when we are not there with them, then you're in the right place. So get your wellies on, grab the dog lead, let's go for a walk, and let's talk about it. So, to kick us off, let's look at probably the most common things new puppy owners are told about separation training. And basically, that is just leave them. Just leave them alone. They need to be left alone early and they need to be left alone often. Otherwise, they will just become too dependent on you. So just crack on straight away. They need to learn that you won't always be there. And right, fairly, on the surface, that actually sounds reasonable. It sounds perfectly logical, doesn't it? But when we look at how learning actually works in the brain, particularly learning under stress, this advice pretty much starts to fall apart really quickly because a dog who is distressed when left alone, and this is usually 99.9% of all puppies, right? Because they're just biologically designed at this point to be as clingy as hell when they first come home with you. They are not learning how to cope whatsoever. They're just stressed as fuck. They are not practicing independence. They are not building resilience. What they are doing is simply activating and experiencing a survival response every time you leave them on their own. Their nervous system is moving into a state of threat. And once the brain is in that state, learning, as we know, because I've talked about it before in many previous episodes, basically completely shuts down. The thinking part of the brain goes offline, stress hormones flood the body, and the dog's only objective becomes make this stop. So, if you are lucky enough to have a dog who eventually stops vocalizing or stops outwardly panicking in this scenario, that doesn't automatically mean they're okay. They've learnt the joy of alone time. We're all good here. Sometimes it simply means they've learned that nothing they do changes the outcome for them. That's not calmness and confidence. That's just resignation to a bad situation. And this is where taking a more detailed look at the science of attachment gives us a much more helpful framework to run with. Because when you look at the studies done, I know I've definitely talked about this study before, whether it was in a previous podcast or on Instagram stories, I don't know. But when you look at the findings, they actually don't support the idea that attachment is the enemy of independence at all. In fact, they basically teach us the opposite. So, in human psychology, attachment theory, which is basically what we're talking about here, was developed primarily through the work of John Bowlby and then later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. And one of the most important, often misunderstood findings from their work is this: secure attachment does not create clingy, dependent individuals. It actually, conversely to so many of the sound bites you'll have undoubtedly already heard on separation training, creates confident, independent ones. So, I think the experiment scenario that Ainsworth did was called something like the strange situation experiment, something like that. You can Google it. And it basically showed that children who had primary caregivers that were consistently responsive, emotionally safe, and predictable to that child were more willing to go off and explore the world on their own. They moved away from the caregiver more freely, not because they didn't need them, but because they trusted that the connection they had with them was stable and it wasn't at risk. It wouldn't be threatened by absence, right? They didn't need to constantly check in and act super clingy or even panic when the caregiver left the room, because the feeling of safety that that relationship fostered was internalized already. Now, dogs are not humans. I know you're probably shouting that at me right now, but they are social mammals and they absolutely form attachment bonds in a very similar way. There has been science done. Oh man, what's the name of the two guys? It was like in the late 90s and early noughties. This kind of social experimentation was repeated with dogs and their primary caregivers, right? And the same nervous system principles apply. A dog who feels secure in their relationship doesn't need to monitor it constantly, whereas a dog who feels unsure will cling or follow, shadow, panic, protest, not because they are just spoiled, but because their brain is saying this connection doesn't feel reliable. So, like, I need to keep an eye on it. I need to keep an eye on where that person is because I can't rely on them coming back if I lose sight of them, right? So, when we then try to force independence on our dogs before the dog feels secure, aka we take that brand new puppy and we leave them alone in the crate on the first day. We shut them in the kitchen overnight on the first night before they've established any kind of learned history of trust or reliability or safety with us. Then we often just end up creating the very behavior that we are trying to avoid. Basically, rushing straight into alone time backfires. It's one of the biggest mistakes I see with puppies is that alone time is treated as something separate from relationship building, almost like a box that you need to tick. We'll cuddle now and then we'll leave them alone later so they don't get used to us. We'll go to the pub. But that separation is artificial because a puppy who hasn't yet learned that humans are safe, they are predictable, they are emotionally regulating, has no context for coping when those humans disappear. Independence doesn't come from absence, it comes from feelings of safety. And safety is learned in experiencing it within that connection. So, what does that mean? That means that early puppyhood should focus far more on teaching dogs how to settle, how to rest, how to regulate while the humans are present, rather than on pushing separation prematurely. Because a dog who can relax deeply next to you is laying the groundwork for being able to relax when you're gone. Whereas a dog who spends their first few weeks learning, well, even when I scream, even when I absolutely howl the house down, no one comes back anyway. That is not the foundation for any kind of secure attachment at all. To be confident and happy about the human being leaving, the dog needs to have a bank of learned experience that the human always comes back, that the human is totally responsive and takes care of all the dog's needs, that the human is reliable and predictable. And so there is no need to ever worry about them leaving because we've learnt already that we have total security with them. Okay, so then in that case, if we are not really supposed to dive straight into this whole forced separation thing, how then do we teach separation without leaving? Um, I think one of the most powerful shifts we can make in separation training is realizing, shock horror, that we don't have to leave the house to teach a dog how to tolerate absence. In fact, some of the best early separation work happens while you are still at home, 100%. I often encourage owners to think first about setting up chosen separation rather than enforced separation is the best way to do it. So instead of closing doors and just walking away and forcing the dog into that solitude where they have no control, we create situations where the dog chooses to move away from us because we've set it up so that something super rewarding exists at a distance or around a corner. And that might look like filling a Kong and then tying it up outside the room that you are sitting in, or placing a really tasty chew on the other side of a baby gate to where you are, or setting up enrichment that basically requires the dog to physically leave your side in order to go off and enjoy it somewhere else, and make it something that they can't just pick up and bring back to sit by your feet with. So just like tie it to something or secure it somewhere so they have to enjoy it where it is and you're just in another room around the corner. Now, what is important here is not really the food or the toy or the treat or whatever it is you choose. It's the emotional experience that the dog is having. The dog is learning, I can move away from my person and have absolutely nothing bad happen. There is no negative experience to be had here when I'm away from that person. I can't see them. I'm in a different room and I'm still having the time of my life. I'm still entirely safe. I still feel good. And that is a completely different nervous system lesson than being shut in a room alone whilst panicking, freaking out about it. Now, it's worth saying at this point that something that is worth highlighting here is that separation anxiety, right, is used as a blanket term. It's like an umbrella term, but there are actually multiple, um, quite different emotional profiles that sit underneath it. Okay. So some dogs are genuinely afraid of being alone. The absence of social presence itself is what triggers their panic. Other dogs are not so much afraid of being alone, but they are afraid of being separated from one specific person. And those two experiences feel very different. So, dogs who fear isolation, their distress is tied to aloneness itself. Whereas dogs with hyperattachment, on the other hand, they they might unravel completely when their person leaves, even if there is still another dog or another human or the rest of the family are still at home in the house. Their distress is relational, right, to that individual. And if we don't recognize that difference, we risk applying the wrong strategy to fix it. Okay? Because a dog who is terrified of isolation may need a much slower, safety based approach that focuses on presence and predictability, whereas a dog with hyperattachment may benefit from gently redistributing emotional reliance, teaching that dog that comfort and safety and regulation, it doesn't all just live in one person. Okay. And those are two different strategies that you would need to apply. So let's take a look then at what is actually happening during separation distress so that we know what we're working with. So, when a dog panics during separation, their amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, right, Captain Panic, as I've called it so many times, is highly active, is taking over. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are released into the bloodstream. The heart rate increases, muscle tension rises, digestive processes pretty much shut down, which is why you will tend to find that dogs who are really stressed about being alone, they won't even engage with any treats or kongs or anything like that that you leave out to distract them. Some of them won't even drink water at all until the owner returns. Okay. And this is not just a dog being dramatic or being naughty. This is literally just a mammalian survival response, right? And it's why punishment or ignoring them or just letting them cry it out so often makes things worse, because we have to understand the dog isn't choosing the behavior. The behavior is happening to the dog, which means our training goal has to be emotional regulation first, not just compliance. So let's explore desensitization that respects the nervous system and what is happening for your dog. Now, truly effective separation training is by necessity basically really slow. And it's not because dogs are incapable of figuring this stuff out, but because ultimately nervous systems change through repetition, lots of repetition below threshold, not through overwhelm. So the only way to achieve that is like slow and steady wins the race, right? So we start with absences that are so small that the dog barely even registers them. Seconds, sometimes fractions of seconds. Like you're popping behind the door frame and then you're popping back out again. You know, you're walking to the end of the room just outside and then you're walking straight back again. The aim is not duration or distance, it's just neutrality. That is all we want. We just want no response. We want to do that thing and then the dog goes, oh, okay, cool. And so with that in mind, right, the ideal response isn't even excitement when you come back. We don't want the dog to like start jumping up at you when you've walked back into the room. We don't want that like big, moment of relief. We don't want that. We literally want indifference. And to get indifference, you kind of need to do something a lot of times until it just gets boring. Do you know what I mean? It needs to get boring to the dog. Like I want them to lose interest in the fact that you keep leaving the room and coming back. Like we need total, I couldn't really give a fuck about what you're doing at all energy. That is our goal with this exercise, right? And I know that seems like a very high bar for those of you who are maybe starting at completely rock bottom with a really, really stressed dog, but it's the bar that tells us that the nervous system is genuinely feeling safe in that moment. Now, personally, I really, really love baby gates for separation work. Um, Baby gates are one of my favorite tools for this kind of training because they sit in that middle ground for your dog of being alone but not being alone, and being separated, but also still being together. So they obviously allow your dog, with you on one side and your dog on the other side, your dog can still see you, they can still hear you, they can still smell you, they know you are still there, but they cannot access you. And this creates that first really gentle, tolerable distance, which is exactly the first step that the nervous system needs in order for us to start that adaptation, right? And we can then just step away briefly. We can move between rooms. We can gradually increase separation without just sudden disappearance. And for so many dogs, so many dogs, this is the missing link that makes true progress possible. I actually have a really nice little separation training video on my TikTok account. I think it might be a couple of years old. You might have to like scroll back a bit. I don't know if I've ever reposted it. If you don't follow me already, it's never too late. I'm at Listen Dog Training on both Instagram and TikTok. So you can go and watch that for what is pretty much my little step by step method for introducing micro absences with a baby gate, desensitizing our dogs to entrances and exits through the front door, all of that kind of thing, which is the beginning of your journey. And I think you'll find that really useful because it's all very well. I know you guys like listening to this podcast when you're out on your walks, but it's a nice little demo video that should hopefully make it a bit easier, and you can just save it, and it's probably only like 2 minutes long. So it's a nice little chunk that you can just save and go back and look at again whilst you're trying it out with your dog. But okay, let's wrap this episode up now because I've probably yabbered on for, yeah, nearly 25 minutes. So let me just reiterate what is basically, I think, the most important information you need to remember when it comes to separation stress in dogs. So, first of all, prevention starts with connection. If I could redesign how we approach separation training from day one, it would look radically different from what the majority of people actually get told when they bring home a dog or a puppy. We would prioritize emotional regulation with humans present, rest and safety in proximity of human beings, and then choice based distance. So that is like the tie out toys, giving your dog a really enticing choice to step away and create some distance from you themselves that is ultimately very rewarding for them. And then the introduction of multiple micro absences once there is a level of trust that has been established there, and only then, right? And then prioritizing gradual absence without panic. That's really important, as opposed to just throwing them in at the deep end. Yeah, from day one, and just having them just go crazy because they don't know what the hell's going on. So basically, what I'm saying is it is totally cool to cuddle and dote on your puppy in the first few days that you bring them home, because I know you want to, but you're scared to, but you don't need to be because you're not going to break them. You're not going to ruin them. Ultimately, confident independence is not something that we force upon them. It's something that emerges as a behavior when the nervous system feels safe enough to let go and to trust and to rely on the people and the environment around them that, you know what, this is okay. I don't need to panic because I know that I am safe. And it's also worth noting here, when you decide you're going to work on this separation training in any kind of active way, like you've got your baby gate, you're like, right, I'm going to like do a few of these exercises this afternoon. We're going to do a bit of separation, stepping behind the door. We're going to follow this tutorial. Just apply a light sprinkling of common sense as to when you are most likely to achieve success with the exercise, right? So make sure that your dog, for example, is exercised. Make sure they are fed, make sure they are toileted, make sure they're in a pretty calm place already. Maybe they're gearing up for a nap in the next 10-20 minutes or so. We don't want them like really highly strung and full of energy, and maybe they need the toilet and they haven't had any exercise or play or anything today, so they're kind of bouncing off the walls. That's not the best time to do this kind of stuff. So set your dog up to succeed by ticking all of those boxes before you do the exercise, and the progress will just happen. It will follow. Okay. So, if you are an owner of a dog who currently struggles with being alone, I just want you to hear this. You did not cause this by being too loving or doting or whatever it is you've been told. You did not fail by responding to your dog's distress or caving in. That's not my term. It's just like, I don't mean you're caving in, but this is what people will accuse you of from the other side of the fence, because connection, having a connection with your dog, that is not the problem. Insecurity is the problem. And insecurity is something that we can work with compassionately and intelligently, because ultimately, separation training isn't about teaching dogs that we leave whenever we like, they just need to suck it up, deal with it, get over it. It's about teaching them that absence is safe. And that lesson begins way before the front door ever closes. It's in all the tiny graduations towards and into that experience that you are setting up along the way. So I really hope that's been a helpful little exploration of the topic, and it's busted any bad advice you might have previously heard. If you know someone who's currently struggling with a clingy dog, or a dog who is struggling to cope when they are left alone, please feel free to share this episode with them. That would be amazing. But for now, I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your dog walk, or whatever it is that you're up to. You don't have to be walking your dog, I don't really mind. And I will see you same time next week for another episode of The Walk and Talk.